Hi everyone, my name is Tetsuya. I am from Japan. I am a Singapore lover and a frequent visitor to Singapore. If you are a Singaporean person, I think maybe you might also like Japan for tourism. So I hope we can be good friends with each other through this channel. In this channel, I will share a lot of my insight about Singapore from my Japanese perspective. Sometimes I simply talk about what are impressive and interesting about Singapore, and often I will involve my comparison insights between Singapore and Japan. Also, I will sometimes involve the comparison of Singapore and a few different countries. So, today's theme is Singapore is the best among all four countries in Southeast Asia in 6 points. Now, let's get started. So the first best point about Singapore I am going to talk about today is safety. Generally speaking, in most places in these four countries, it is relatively safe. So it would be really rare to encounter troubles. But still in all these countries' capital cities, if you accidentally go into specific areas, you might happen to get involved in danger. It is also not recommended to walk around after dark, generally in these three countries. Normally, it is safe, but there are hidden dangers, especially tourists might be involved. But in case of Singapore, the safety level is great, and the crimes tourists encounter is really, really limited. Also in Singapore, people's driving etiquette is great, combined with other very good road conditions and great town planning. Pedestrians can walk safely in most places. And when you are on automobiles, traffic accidents are of so low possibility. So you are extremely safe as well. So if I consider those conditions about safety, I add scores this way. So the next best point in Singapore is it is really easy to visit tourist places in Singapore. In fact, this is a bit sneak comparison. What I mean by being easy to visit tourist places is since Singapore is a small country, everything's nearby. So it doesn't take much time to see many things. Just in case, I am not talking about the fact that Singapore has a great public transportation. That's why it is possible to access area easily. Yes, there are certainly good public transportation in Singapore, but what I want to emphasize this time is that the compact land size of Singapore helps people to go anywhere easily in a short time. When it comes to the other three countries, their land size are all huge. So even though there are a lot of tourist places, it is almost or impossible to see many things in one time visit, even if you are a backpacker. Indonesia is especially a large country with huge number of islands. So Indonesia is the most difficult country to see everything. As I said, this is a bit sneak comparison. But anyway, the score I add to each country at this point is this way. So let me move on to the next point. The next best thing about Singapore is its cleanliness. Nothing to say about this because this fact is really famous all over the world. But I still feel this is something really impressive about Singapore, not only compared to these three countries, but when compared with many other countries in the world. Among these three countries, Malaysia is relatively better when it comes to littering. But still including these two countries, there are relatively a lot of people who don't care littering in public places. So I can find rubbish on the streets or roads relatively often. Even in these three countries, there are a lot of people, including my friends, who never or almost never litter in public places. Still, another group of people do so. So as a result, the cities tend to be not clean. When it comes to Singapore, one of the important factors why Singapore is clean would be because the regulation is really strict and littering causes people some fine. but it is still possible to try to litter without being fined if police officers are not watching people. But generally speaking, I don't see much rubbish except for around the rubbish bin at night before cleaning is done, which is impressive. So the scores I add to each country for this cleanliness of the cities are this. So the next best thing about Singapore is hygiene. One of the main reasons why I talk about this is especially because I was surprised when I used a restroom in Singapore for the first time. Out of four countries in Singapore, restrooms are clean. And what's more surprising was sanitizer to clean the toilet seat. I can't clearly remember when I saw a sanitizer for the first time in Singapore, but most probably it was at Changi Airport. When I saw the sanitizer, it was in 2006. At that time, I don't remember anywhere else in the world I saw sanitizers attached inside restrooms except for Singapore and Japan, at least in my experience, even including Europe. Also, when it comes to hygiene, what I come up with to my mind are cockroaches, flies, and mice. As for Malaysia and Indonesia, I commonly saw a lot of cockroaches in houses when I visit my friends' houses. Of course, they may have no choice because the warm and wet tropical climate is the best environment for cockroaches. But still, I hate cockroaches, and they are so scary and were often walking on the tables in the kitchen. Also, they are certainly very dirty. As for mice, I sometimes saw big ones in one of these three countries. As for flies, I often see them in Thailand and Indonesia because there are a lot of street food shops. But on the other hand, when I lived in Singapore for some time, I never saw any cockroaches in my house. I have never seen any mice. Of course, in other places, not only at restrooms, Singapore is so clean. So hygiene standard is pretty high. So the score I add to each country is this way. Then the next best thing in Singapore is tap water quality. This is also outstanding in Singapore among the four countries. Nothing to say, Singapore is the only country where tap water is drinkable. In other three countries, unless tap water is boiled, it is not possible to drink because of bacteria. One time, even worse, in one of these three countries, I saw yellow tap water that might have contained rust and something else from the water pipe. In case of Singapore, I guess the government invests a sufficient amount of money for the maintenance of the water pipes, so the tap water quality stays good. So as for the scores of this point, I will add scores to each country as shown like this. Then the next best thing about Singapore is in Singapore, the number of beggars and poor people is really small. I am not so sure of the exact number based on some specific data source. But when it comes to what I can see in Singapore normally, there should be really few because I myself have never seen any beggars in Singapore or poor looking people walking in the city looking for a small amount of money by doing something. On the other hand, when it comes to Thailand, even though the country itself is relatively rich, there are still beggars in Bangkok, though some of them would be doing beggars as a business. In Kuala Lumpur, even though the country is generally wealthy and the place is relatively safe, there are a lot of homeless people in Kuala Lumpur. When it comes to Indonesia, anywhere around in Jakarta, there are a lot of people who are selling something small on the roads, walking up to the cars, waiting for traffic lights to change. On the street, people open a really small shop. Some people are doing some small jobs like unofficial security guards in residential areas. All these people in Indonesia are trying to gain really, really small amount of money by making a great deal of effort in their life. But however hard they try to improve their life, it is not easy to do so. Well, money is of course not everything, but still, if people have sufficient amount of money, people can at least have good and comfortable houses, a sufficient amount of food without being exposed to some serious survival environment. That's why it will be good. On the other hand, in Singapore again, as I said earlier, I have not seen beggars or poor looking people in the city. So, as for how to add scores of this point, if fewer beggars and fewer poor people are in the cities, I will add higher score. So the score in the comparison chart becomes this way. And talking about the summary of today's best thing about Singapore, it becomes this way in scores. What do you think about your own judgment about the 4 points I mentioned today? Also, please don't forget to subscribe my channel to watch more future Singapore related videos in my channel. Thank you and see you soon in other videos.